over to the mids team. Take it away.
All right, who's going first?
I'll take it. Thanks, Erica. In we're just waiting on our second co-convener, Elspeth, to jump in, but just wanted to say hey, thanks everyone for coming up. We're at the mids session. Those of you who are wondering what MIDS means, MIDS is the minimum information about digital specimens standard. It's currently in its draft format. We have come out the other side of expert review, and we are having in conversations with the TADWIG exec and the TAG around a couple of bits and pieces that need straightened out. But I'm going to drop a link to you don't want my side of soft Jira link, you want this. There we go. So this is a link to the MIDS website as we are right now to kind of get everybody grounded and oriented to where we are.
You sent that to me, Sharon.
If you want to drop it in the
boom, there we go.
Sweet, thanks.
I almost sent it right to Ben, so it's fine.
Yeah, teamwork. It's all the teamwork. It works, right? Yeah. So for those of you who don't know what MIDS is, like I said, it's the minimum information about digital specimens standard. And what in brief it is, it's a way of allowing collection managers, curators, anyone who's interested, a standardized way of documenting the completeness of a data set. And it's based around the Darwin Core archives. We'll get into that a little bit along the way. And we'll talk about some of the tools that you can use to do this. And one of the big things that came out of the expert review that Kat will talk about is looking at this standard in terms of different disciplines and domains. So with that said, I'm not going to read the website to you, but I'm going to throw it over to Ben to do a real quick walkthrough of the website, what's there right now, and how it hangs together. You'll see a big red draft at the top. Like I said, is because we are just coming out of expert review, hoping to ratify this year. Go for it, Ben.
Sure. So yeah, this is draft. We've just got past the expert review. We're still waiting on the public review. So things are moving along. We made a bunch of changes with the expert review, which is really good, which I'll go over very briefly. But so what is MIDS? So MIDS is split into 4 components. There are levels, disciplines, info elements, and mappings. And I'm going to go straight to the info elements. So each level represents a level of digitization. 0, 1, 2, 3. We originally had 3, then we had to add the 0. It's just the level of digitization per record in your data set. So every record gets one of these 4 levels. To make a level, you have to map to things. And so that's where disciplines come in. Part of the problem was, chronostratigraphy is very important for paleo, but biology shouldn't be counted against them, right? Because it doesn't apply. And so what we had to do is split into 3 disciplines and then define those disciplines. So each one of these information elements changes based on the discipline. So you'll see chronostratigraphy is a MIDS level 1 for paleontology, but is obviously not in biology and not in geology either. Geology has quantitative type things. Some of them are the same, license, modified name, fairly universal. And then you have date collected, but date collected is not necessarily in paleo or geo here. Collected, it's not a species occurrence record. Media is in this one, you get the idea. So different levels, different criteria per discipline. Now, the next question usually is, what if I have a mixed collection? Great question. You just got to pick one. They're sort of working on it. And also, which is really important here for the mappings to say upfront, is that MIDS is not a data quality assessment. There's this point where we realize that does NA count as a mapping? Is that a checkbox? If you enter NA for in some of the quantitative location fields, will that satisfy the criteria for level 2? And the answer is yes, because MIDS is not a data quality assessment. There's a very distinct line between that. That's for data quality folks. This just literally checks the existence of a value with a couple, it sort of null and empty string and things, but just basic stuff. But this does not do data quality. We had to just do it that way. So then you have the information elements. So as you can see, they have levels, information elements, and if you go down, each information element is defined. And it's got a usage notes and what the purpose is, like why is this information element there? These are carefully selected to represent what's the important categories of any kind of data set, right? So I'm not going to go through these, but you can go on down. Then each one of these information elements, to satisfy them, you have mappings. And this is where this is. So these are the Darwin Core terms that map to each of these information elements in triple SOM. It's just extra mappings, but you can see how these work. So we take it to Mathias can show this. He's got a MIDS checker. It goes through. Does this person have values in one of these columns? That's a checkbox for that information element. Get all the information elements. You get a check for that level, and it goes from there. And that's how it sort of breaks down. We anticipate mappings are non-normative. Matt, tell me if I'm wrong about that. We've kind of gone back and forth on this. They will now, obviously, not going to change on the drop of a hat. These are important, but obviously, things we don't imagine the information elements and levels changing very much, but certainly mappings will change as other vocabularies add terms, right? So I know the next phase of Darwin Core will have a couple new terms for location, for example, and so we'll add those to the mappings on this page. So, all right, that's a really quick rundown. You're welcome to view the website. There's all kinds of fun things to look at. Obviously, feedback on the website to explain this stuff is very important. So, all right.
Hey, Ben, do me a favor,
Yes,
just go back
yes.
up to the top of the
Yes.
page for me. Yeah, so what you'll find on the website is those information elements and the definitions of each of them. If you click across to the mappings tab for me, Ben.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, this is where we talk about those mappings and how they hang together. There's a really important part of what makes MIDS a little different to some of the other descriptive standards. Go up to the top again.
Sure.
Resources, yeah, click there. So we have some tools and we're going to talk about those, but the next tab along tells you sort of about the development of the different tools that there are. And we indicate where we had draft web tools and they've now deprecated and been replaced by other things. The next thing up on the website at the top there is about, again, this is why do we have the standard? Well, the context and the history, again, not going to read it because you all know how to read. And then there's also the GitHub repo on the right-hand side. And this is where you'll find a log of all of the issues, the discussions that the group have had, how you can contribute if you're interested in getting in touch with us. Just scroll down just a tiny bit for me, Ben. A little bit more to the members section right there.
Okay.
All right, here we go. So the three conveners, Elspeth, Kat, and Mathias, and then Stefan is here with us. He's kind of up in that top tier, but then there's a whole bunch of other people who've been in touch. But if you're interested, you want to join in, the group meets on a Thursday. And please feel free to email one of the conveners and jump in for a session if you have a question, or multiple sessions if you wanted to come hang out and hear how these things go. So those are the resources that we have. Thanks for doing that, Ben. Next up, let's see. Let me go back.
I think it's me to talk about
Next,
the discipline, which Ben honestly kind of covered most of what I was going to say when showing off his website. That's fine. I'm not going to complain. I am a little bit of a nervous presenter orator, so I'm going to shamelessly read off of some notes. I will try not to make it so robotic. So thanks for your patience, y'all. But yeah, the discipline. So we decided on disciplines for MIDS. Again, this is going to be a little repetitive because Ben already went over this. But the prospect of doing a one-size-fits-all approach for this kind of framework, it's a little impossible. So yeah, we've got distinct schemas for 3 different disciplines: the bio, the paleo, and geology.
Hey, Kat,
Sharon,
just real quick, share your screen, or Ben, maybe you could put the disciplines up so people can see them.
Oh yeah, Ben,
it.
if it's quickly accessible for you, that'd be great because I need to like clear some tabs and
Sure.
clean up things.
Right.
Thank you.
Scroll down to there we go.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, and I will also put a link anchored to the discipline schemas in the chat so our friends can follow along. Yeah, so not all information elements are required by each discipline because the needs of a paleo collection, obviously are going to be different from an entomological collection or a geo collection. Doesn't make sense to hold them all to the same standard. So we spent a lot of time interfacing with the paleo and the geo communities. Big thanks to Ben, honestly, for just like all of the work you've done in that area, because paleo and geo are just not in my wheelhouse, and they're not in Elspeth's wheelhouse or Matthias's wheelhouse. Yeah, like your knowledge has been actually really valuable in that regard. So anyways, what was I saying? A lot of interfacing and determining what made sense to include and require for mids and what didn't. So like as an example for meeting mids 1, yeah, you've got it on the screen. Meeting mids 1 paleo uniquely requires a chronostratigraphy value and that makes sense for paleo, right? It wouldn't make sense to require that for a botany like an herbarium collection. So the requirements are going to be slightly different for these disciplines. Just seemed like the sensible thing to do. And yeah, I think that's all I really had prepared to say. I don't need to sound like a broken record, so any questions, holler, put them in the chat, and then I will pass it off to
Matthias.
Looks like the next up is Matthias. So
Steve's got a question. Real quick.
Yeah. So in looking at these information elements, what is the subject that these are about? Is it about the collection, or is it about items in the collection? Because some things like collector seem like it's an item in the collector, but other things seem to be about the collection as a whole.
I want to take that.
So MITS is designed to work at the individual record level, the specimens in the collection. So not at the collection level, but they can be aggregated to the collection level.
I think it's important to think of them in context of the mappings. Like if it's not really what they're describing or what the subject is more, is it a Darwin Core term? And then maybe it's the same value for every single record in the Darwin Core, and that's okay because they populated it, right? License, for example, is going to be probably the same value for every single record, and that describes the data set itself. But there's no distinction about that here. It's just the mappings and what it's an indicator for the level of digitization. So it's a functional purpose.
So if you assign a MIDS level, you're not assigning it to the collection, you're assigning it to items in the collection then?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Records. Well, records in the data set.
Go ahead, John.
Hello. Because it was brought up, the concept of a record, feel free to defer this to later, but I want to get the question out there. What do you do when it becomes unclear what a record is, like in a Darwin Core data package? Have you thought about how MIDS applies in that scenario?
Yes. And
hang on. Before you go, Ben, Matthias, go ahead. And then
okay.
So
Go ahead,
yes, I did and still very experimental mapping from MIDS elements to Darwin Core data package. That is an interpreted usage of a Darwin Core data package for specimen data, which I hope covers the full extent. I haven't been able to really test it because data package is not fully ratified yet. But that is how I would approach it. So it would again be quite a single table focused way of looking at the data, at the material table in this case. So I can link the mappings that I made for this. And there are some tables linked to the material table. If I recall correctly, there's also a few instances, but those were a bit more problematic, where there's one table sitting in between. But that is indeed one of the current limitations of, well, mainly of the triple SOM approach, is that it kind of focuses on these simple hierarchies. And when you get a very relational structure, that becomes a bit more difficult.
is that John?
Curious how you apply the measures in the end. So take an example. Suppose we have a specimen and it has 3 different identifications. And one of those identifications is very good one. I mean, very specific one, but nobody thinks it's correct. And yet the specimen has a lot of information, a lot of identification information. Or similarly about space and time, where that stuff's not in the same table. ever. What do you do?
So the first bit of that is just to say there's a difference between quality of an identification and having an identification. And so once you start tipping into that, well, is it a good one or a bad one? That then kind of would be a different level if we were going to go there. The first piece of this is, do we even have one? It's more about completeness than correctness at that point. And Elspeth just jumped in. Mathias, and then Wouter, and then John.
Yeah, I think the idea is really like first what Sharon said. It's about digitization status, not about data quality. So it's about whether the data has been captured during the digitization process, so we can actually put a measure on how well digitized our data currently are. And with regards to how that works for data that's currently in some systems attached indirectly to the record, some sort of flattening will be needed because the core concept of MIDS is the individual specimen. We're trying to make an assessment, a calculation, assign a MIDS level to specimen data. So it sort of presumes that there is a way to flatten or simplify that, similar to the way that the Darwin Core archive works.
Does that get to most of it, John?
I think so. I mean, a Darwin Core archive is basically a view on a Darwin Core data package, and since it applies to a Darwin Core archive, you could do it to a flattened view, although it might be several records in that case, but you could still apply MIDS to those flattened views.
I think there'd be some conditionals too, that if you have this table populated but not that one, right, one of these two tables satisfies it. And so it's just, we haven't quite got there yet, right? We're just sort of waiting on the ratification. But I know there's got to be a solution to this, right? It just depends on how we want to do it.
Then, okay, so I want to take it up to Wouter.
Yeah, the name of the standards already says that it's a standard for a digital representation of a single specimen. So whether that digital representation is consisting of a single table or record or multiple tables, that basically doesn't matter. So if there are multiple identifications which are in a separate table, the only thing it needs to satisfy is that there is at least one identification. Whether that identification is good or whether there are many, that is not measured.
Okay, cool. There is a question in the chat which I'm going to get to. I just want to get a little further through the agenda, and then we can address that one. I've noticed it, I've seen it, and we'll come back around to it. That's okay. All right, so where are we? Oh, let's get through here. So Mathias.
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief about this point 4. It's just to give a heads up of some things that have also changed, other than the disciplines being really worked out, in particular with the expert reviewers. So some new elements were added, in particular for the other two disciplines beyond biology, which we worked on first. So chronostratigraphy and stratigraphic context. We've changed some names of some of the elements for internal consistency, because that had drifted over time, for organization ID, for the determinations. And after long discussions, we dropped type status as a property in MIDS, because it was a very problematic one to measure in practice. Even though it is very important for collections, it's very difficult to measure that type status has not been digitized, because most specimens are not types. So that's why we ultimately omitted it. We have also added some new triple SOM mappings, like I said earlier, for Darwin Core data package, although that one is still experimental. And we also have separate mappings now for the different disciplines. And these have been tested by the expert reviewers doing the expert review. And we have also tried to look at the developments ongoing in the field of geology. We tried to work with an experimental export of the GeoAPI's website, which worked, but all of these standards are still ongoing processes, so it's a bit of a moving target. So we'll pick up that work again in the future. beyond that, I would think I'm going to just go ahead for the sake of time and talk about what changed with the MITS calculator. So for that one, I'll first go over the updates and then I'll give a short brief demo. For those who don't know, the MITS calculator is a standalone tool and our Shiny application that was developed to make it easy to calculate MITS scores for specimen data, and working initially particularly with Darwin Core archives of all sorts of origin. That has now been extended with new mappings to support a few other standard types. Not Darwin Core data package yet, because that needs a different kind of parsing, but it includes ABCD and a different discipline support. There's been, I'll show that later, a better visualization of the metadata of the mappings. I've added some quality of life functionalities like in the results filter, and fixed a few of the bugs and a bit of documentation. So I'll share my screen and go. It should be this one. Can you all see this?
Yep.
So this is the MITS calculator. It's a standalone tool, so it's supposed to be run on a local machine or on a local server that you set up, because it requires quite a bit of RAM processing large data sets. I've set it now to process our latest herbarium data export that we put on our IPT, which is the Darwin Core archive. But you have all sorts of different mappings which you can now select from. These are the IDs for the mapping sets, but the app also now indicates a bit more metadata about what those mappings represent. So we have Darwin Core archives for the different disciplines. You have ABCD, the experimental one for the mineral extension with geology, and also just one for a simple occurrence Darwin Core file. And I've run this analysis before the meeting, which give it a few seconds to visualize, because it can take quite some minutes for very large data sets. This one is 3 million records, so that takes quite a bit of time to process. And this is what the app then ultimately looks like. It calculates the MITS levels for each specimen, visualizes the aggregate results across the whole data set, so the specimen count for each MITS levels, then distributed also among the different information elements, so you can also see which one is actually blocking it, and you can also select one of them to see why, for instance, something is not happening, to look at the individual mappings that might block it. So for instance, for geographic locality ID, this is looking at whether a georeferencing of a record really has all the required metadata fields to make that georeferencing interpretable, so including the datum, including the precision, which is not the case for our data set because of issues with the source system. So that's why, for instance, this one gets blocked. So you can also find out more detailed reasons about why some of your information elements are blocking specimens in your collection from reaching higher MITS scores. You can get summary tables with the more accurate numbers. You can look at a table that will take a bit longer to load. And finally, you can also export the results as needed. So that is a bit of the MITS Calculator app, which you can just, I added the Google Drive link to where the installers can be found. So on a Windows machine, you can run it as an installer. Otherwise, you can just clone the repository and run it as a simple R-Shiny app. So also, very briefly, for those who didn't see it at Living Data, the conference last year, I had a digital presentation about a little project that we did also in the MITS group, which was so essentially calculating the MITS levels for all of the specimens that could be found at that time in GBIF. It was a pretty large download. So you can see the results in this extended abstract from that presentation. The presentation was recorded, but the recording itself had some sound issues, unfortunately. So I've also linked the exact presentation here in case anybody is interested in that. So I'll leave it briefly at that. If anybody has any questions, I really want to promote discussion as much as possible, because this is a working session, not a dissemination session. Yes, Steve?
Go ahead, Steve.
I have a question which doesn't necessarily need to be addressed immediately, but I see there's a IRI discussion later on. And one of the things that I have been curious about is why the group has chosen to call these things information elements. When I look at the table, they look like properties, right? It's a term that has a value. And you're doing SSOM mappings to things that are properties. So I guess I just don't understand, why don't you just call them properties? Like why was the decision made to call them information elements?
The main reason, the main reason for that was that in the earlier stages of MITS, we got a lot of people thinking of MITS as yet another standard that your data needs to be converted to. And it's a new standard like Darwin Core that people need to map their data to. That's not really the case, because the main thing that MITS does is it leverages an existing standard to calculate a certain score. So the main output are the MITS levels and potentially a binary map of the different elements that have been achieved or not. So that's why we opted to call it something different, to avoid this confusion, because it's not really something that data is supposed to be assigned to. You don't exchange data in the MITS standard. You don't format your data according to the MITS standard.
So I guess I don't have an issue with just calling them that, but I mean, the question, which I think may be relevant later on, is like fundamentally, what are they? And when I look at them, they look like properties to me. The MIDS levels and the field, like biology, whatever, there could be some discussion about what those are, but certainly those many elements under the hood, they look like properties to me. So like I said, I don't see any harm in calling them information elements, but when it gets down to like how you're actually going to handle them or whatever, like rather than saying we have a new kind of thing that we have to handle in some different kind of way, if they are actually properties, then we would just handle them like we handle properties. That's, I guess, my point.
Yeah, I think it's also a bit because of the way that MITS works. We want to avoid overkilling it with how it's extensively documented in a structured manner, because that's needed for an effective standard, like I said earlier, where you want to exchange the data in that way. But for MITS, it's more like a facilitated mechanism to calculate a metric. It is a bit more than that, because it's also a list of properties that people who are interested in digitization should be prioritizing and should be looking at. So it has a few extra functionalities, the standard. But yeah, you can go very far in trying to completely model it in an RDF way, and that might be overkill compared to what MITS is trying to achieve.
I think at the end of the day, it's not so much, like you said, Steve, it's not so much about what it's called, it's about what it does, right? So yeah, we can work out what we want to call it as long as it reflects what it does, right?
When I joined, for the credit, when I joined this group, I guess 2.5 years ago, that was my first question too. Like, why are we calling them information elements and levels? Like, why are they not class and properties? And they spent 2 months just proving why I was wrong. Eventually, it just said it really is different. You know what I mean? Because it'd be nice, right? It'd be convenient. Like, and how are these just not basic class and property? They just function totally differently. You know, they're just metrics for analysis. They're not necessarily describing anything. You know what I mean? They're just a mechanism by which you can measure something in a data set. So they just function differently. So it lead to confusion. And so we call them something else.
Does that help, hinder, or not even answer the question, Steve?
I guess the thing is, like, something can be a property. You don't have to force somebody to use it in a certain way, right? Like, you could, I mean, these are things that have, presumably will have identifiers and definitions and examples. Maybe that's all you really care about. You could still have a property that just has those things, and you can tell people we don't care about RDF, I mean, I guess, in some of the previous discussion, the question is, do we have to create a new infrastructure to handle this thing, or can we use what we already have? And we have an infrastructure for handling properties. If they're not properties and we call them something else, are we gonna have to build a whole new thing? This is like what is underlying my question. Because like again, you could have the ability to create RDF, but don't expose it and don't tell anybody to use it, and it just be hidden somewhere, but you could still use the existing infrastructure that we have to handle versioning and stuff like that.
Yeah, I wonder if we could call it Fred, right, and handle it like a property. I guess is what I'm trying to say, right? I mean, if they were called information properties instead of information elements, to try and split the difference to indicate that they are different, but they're still properties. If that makes sense.
I mean, you wouldn't even have to expose to the world that they're properties. I'm just saying from the infrastructure standpoint, handle them as properties and just keep calling them information elements like you are.
Yeah, so I think this segues nicely into the IRI discussion that we want to have later in this call. I do want to also add that so thanks to Matthew Blissett, there is now a test setup of IRIs for MIDS, and I think that is my preferred choice of going forward to see how that works. If there are potential issues with this demo implementation, then it becomes much easier, I think, for people to understand where the different sides are coming from, and also what complications might be or might not be with using the existing infrastructure. So just see how far we can get with trying to use the existing infrastructure to see if some changes are even needed.
So we have a couple of options at this point. We do have a couple of questions or several questions in the chat which aren't about IRIs, and we do have a space in the agenda to talk about the IRIs, and we've got about 24 minutes. So I'm gonna lean into Kat and Elspeth, who I saw jump in, to help me out. We can either handle the non-IRI questions now and kind of get those tied up, or we could have the IRI conversation and then round out with the questions. I have a thought, but Kat, Elspeth, you are, and
maybe
Mathias, you are.
I feel like the IRI discussion is going to turn into a whole thing. So like maybe let's address the other questions first, and then we can do the IRIs. Like that's just my humble opinion. See what Elspeth has.
Elspeth.
So sorry about the chaos here, but yeah, I think that's a good. I think it's a good plan. I think looking at the questions, they look relatively straightforward. I think we could go through them fairly quickly and then go on to IRI discussion, because it'd be nice to have plenty of time for the IRI discussion as well.
Matt, is that okay with you?
Yep.
Okay, so Steve, we will come back up around. So I'll be back. Okay, so I'm just going to try and go back up. I think the first one that we had was talking about AI. Javier, are you around? Do you want to? There was a flurry of answers and discussion, so let's have a look at that a little bit. So the question was, do you want me to read it out? I can read it out. It says, I have a slightly more general question. Is there any Tadwig group dedicated to the potential issue of false records? For example, those generated by AI. Hope this is not yet a real problem, but we should anticipate future challenges. And then I saw Ben and Patricia, you had some, and Kat. So I guess, Ben, do you want to start out? And then Patricia?
I think just to be careful about equating AI to false. I mean, I know we've used AI to really parse through huge description things into really nice atomized fields for we just did a history of science and technology collection, which is a really odd group of objects, little instrumentations and things people used to use, and we had a lot of success with it. I think that's fake data. I think we conflate the two sometimes. I know iNaturalist has fake photos. I can't mention this probably. Yeah, and that makes sense too. But I don't think there's really. I mean, if somebody's going to fake their records, I mean, I could fake it without AI. I could just type in a script on my MySQL database and just generate a bunch of stuff, right? I think at the end of the day, that becomes a data quality thing and not really something in the MIDS jurisdiction. It's very hard to detect those things too, but there's not a currently TIWIC group addressing it. And AI is still I think the machine observations has a group for AI for doing like object identification and how to handle that metadata, but that's another group entirely.
Patricia?
Yeah, I was just answering that TEDWIC may do in future standards to explain how AI was used or which algorithm, which AI system, but it's actually not the role of TEDWIC to develop application to detect in the content what is real or fake. It's more eNaturalis who has to develop a system with experts or image recognition to check if something is real or not real. And it's not really the role of TEDWIC to develop such applications. So we can describe it as a standard, but others have to develop it. So not to confuse roles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kat, anything you want to add there?
So I think that this is really indeed something more at the implementation side of standards, and it's just going to emphasize the importance of proper provenance of records being added to all these different infrastructures. And that is something that's going to be more and more important across standards, maybe also in MIDS, that we're going to enforce much harder to have clear lines of where data is coming from, because that's the most important part. That data comes from AI is not a problem, but that we don't know where it comes from AI is a problem.
I don't know if there's, I think, Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about the GBIF, because GBIF has been thinking about AI, because like people have said, it's incumbent upon the people submitting the data set to say why, if, or how it was interacted with by an AI. But I know GBIF was thinking about it for sure. Hey, Matt.
Hi. They may well have been, but I'm afraid I wasn't in any of those discussions, so I can't say what we're doing.
Blame Tim. It's all Tim's fault.
Yeah.
Does that sort of at least speak a little bit to the question? Maybe data quality might be a place to go with those. So then the next thing I saw, sorry, I'm just going down the chat. Maxime had a question, thought. Where are you here? Do you want to read out your question? Shall I read it out? Oh, there you are.
Hello. Thanks for the informations. Yeah, I was just wondering, maybe I'm not understanding it correctly, but I was wondering why is there a media ID on the paleo and geology discipline, and there is no media in the MIDS2 level. I understood that media weren't as much necessary in paleo or geology discipline as they are in biology. But I'm curious, I'm wondering why, well, if there is no media required for MIDS2, why is there media ID for MIDS3, basically? But maybe I'm not understanding correctly there.
Thank you. I saw, Adam, you had some stuff to say. Do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think for geology specifically, I don't know why media ID is still there. Personally, I am a geologist, or I used to be a geologist and now I'm a data person. And personally, I think it would make more sense to drop that entirely just because rocks look pretty similar and it's not as useful, for example, for performing measurements to justify the effort. But there are a couple of tickets that have been linked in the chat that are about where media falls and why the media elements are separate and why there are still media ID fields. So I think it's just a conversation that hasn't quite been settled. I am intending, but have not yet to get some feedback from some other geology sample groups about their feelings on the importance of imaging. But there's also, I think Mathias linked it in the chat, but there's also a ticket that Ben posted about where the media element should go at all. So
yeah, thanks for backing up my argument, guys. It's for the media ID level 3. It is a good question, and I think it's still kind of open question about how to handle that kind of thing. And there are perfectly valid arguments on both sides of it for sure.
Yeah. Elspeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One is absolutely, I completely agree that we've got a ticket open, and it'd be really nice to get more discussion going on in the ticket, so we can, whatever happens is actually built on the community as well. That'd be really good. I think the other thing I think just to bear in mind is that what MIDS can also function as is a tool for getting things done, whether that might also mean getting things funded. So if people are looking potentially to get funding to digitize and to including image their geology collections, then it's also worth thinking it could be quite useful to have the imaging part in MIDS. Read it, at the level 3 seems that was kind of a discussion that level 2 was seen as inappropriate for geology. But if people are looking, because I know in the UK, people are looking to image, including image their geology collections, and actually having that in MIDS is can be quite a useful lever to get funding.
Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, that actually touches upon an issue which I always struggle a bit with MIDS. So which is it the goal to get everything to MIDS level 3 and have some information in there? Because that could potentially be that you ask for funding to increase the average MIDS level of your data set and say we need some funding, but then you would expect that in fields that don't apply, that you would indicate that it's impossible to fill those fields by that actually complying to the MIDS, so being able to MIDS level 3 by indicating that it's not possible. Or is it more for research purposes where it's okay that things stick to MIDS level 1 or 2 and it's actually good, because then a researcher can easily filter out or only focus on high MIDS level specimen and only include those in their research?
Somebody from the convening group want to address that one?
And I do think the levels have criteria that they're defined as, like, what is the point of level 3? And I know that's a very good argument for putting media ID at level 3. Like, why is media not there? And like, level 3 really talks about identifiers. And so there's a reason why it seems a bit off, but it really is, really a lot of thought went into grouping certain things by level, right? And the criteria for that level. And if you read the definition, it probably makes more sense.
The other thing I would say about the MIDS levels is this is just the starter set, right? This isn't, oh my God, these can be the only levels ever in the world. And to your point, Sam, if there's a need for a discipline or a set of levels that speak to a different audience, one of the things that's also coming out of this is a standardized way of doing the same thing for different purposes, right? So that's, to the IRI conversation and how we handle that. This isn't the be all and end all of what this could
okay,
be.
but is the goal to get each specimen to a MIDS level 3?
I would just come in on that. Apologies, but a lot of train noise. I think that it is going to be acceptable, depending on, of course it's acceptable for things not to get to MIDS level 3. There might be quite a lot of reasons for that happening. So some collections it may not be appropriate for them to get to MIDS level 3. So I don't, but I think MIDS is I see it as a tool, and it's a tool, I would say, very much from my point of view, it's very much for people who are digitizing their collection. It is a useful thing for researchers as well, as you were saying, in terms of filtering. But I think also researchers can also use other tools to filter their data, which they currently do. So I think I don't think it's critical for researchers. I think it could be quite useful, but I think it is more critical for the collections who are digitizing their collections. That's
okay.
my point of view.
If your asking for funding to increase the MIDS level of a collection, it needs to be very clear that it could also be that MIDS level 1 is the max, or MIDS level 2, let's say, is the maximum that the collection will ever get. So the goal is not it in itself. It's not to reach MIDS level 3, 4 collections, but it can be a tool. Okay, thanks, Elspeth. Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'm going to go to Adam, and then in the interest of time, I'm going to take the chair back real quick and carry on. Go ahead, Adam.
I just wanted to say that I think the challenge with using it as a funding thing is that because the mids levels are blocking, so if you can't fill out all of the mids 2 elements, it'll never reach mids 3. It means that if you, for example, were interested in improving like the linked open data aspects of your collection for a collection that did not meet mids 2, like you would never have like an obvious benefit to that. You wouldn't see the records moving up to 3. And for large historical collections, like I expect a lot of the collection that I manage data for to top out maybe even at mids 1, because we simply don't have some of the contextual information that would allow it to go higher. So it seems to me that mids 2 is potentially blocking the use of this as like a funding, a way to generate funding or generate clear metrics for how that funding is working.
I can respond to that, and then I'm gonna move on to the IRI, and we'll grab other questions. So 2 things to that point. One thing to that point, Adam, is we don't have to think about collections as monoliths. If we were to do the whole of the Smithsonian geology collection, probably wouldn't make it out of 1, let alone 2. But if you break it down into smaller sections, some sections might actually get higher, and so we can, it's going to depend on the collection, the part of the collection, and who's got the time to do it. So there might be a tiny subset of the Field Museum's geology collection that's much better, that can move up, and then you can say, well, look, if you move this small piece up, it can match. Or you talk about the whole collection. I want to put a call out to everybody here who's asked questions. We do meet, the MIDS groups meets every week. So we would love for you to jump in there. And if you have a question that we haven't answered, then we can get round to answering you there. And Elspeth and Kat and Mathias and Stefan can share the links out in the document so people can jump in and join the group. I do want to talk a little bit more about the IRIs. And also to the folks who need to talk about IRIs, we would love for you to hang out with us one Thursday and dig into that. So let's see how we go with that. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I'd have another clarifying question. So from what Mathias was saying, it sounds to me like if you do a MIDS analysis for a collection, it's not likely that somebody's going to be sharing those results. Like they're not going to be creating spreadsheets and submitting them to somebody, right? So, and the reason I ask this is that a lot of the conventions about like how we handle like are identifiers opaque or not, and how do we make it clear to people that there's a controlled value they should use, they shouldn't translate it into their own language. These are all about trying to make it harder for people to do dumb things when they type stuff in spreadsheets. If people aren't going to be like typing stuff in spreadsheets, then a lot of those concerns just go out the window. Then, the question is like, should you capitalize MIDS 1 or not? Like, if people aren't going to be typing in a spreadsheet, it doesn't matter, do whatever you want. So I that's kind of like what I wanted to clarify in the beginning, because like the whole IRI thing becomes a lot. I mean, like I feel like you need to have IRIs because you're using SSOM, and that assumes IRIs. But in terms of the form of the IRIs and how they're related to, strings and stuff like that, if this is all an internal thing that you're using like within applications or whatever, then just the application developers need to understand it. But like in fact, like, do you even need to expose the IRIs? Like that would be another question. Like if people aren't actually going to be typing them or using in their collection management systems. I mean, anyway, these are some of the questions that I have that I think would inform how strict we need to be about like rule following on IRI.
They are required for the mappings, which is sort of a thing, right? That's one key factor that we have to have for the mappings.
I was going to say, Wouter just put a comment in there about sharing information. To Wouter, you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, well, if I understand it right, I think that MIT's information can be very valuable about showing how much value has been created or is maintained and managed. So people might actually, share this information. So like your little collection holding institution in a very small town somewhere, but your country is accumulating all of this information showing how good they are having vouchers for the monitoring system and so on. So I can see use cases that make it very valuable to share these information beyond digitization, which is another use case.
Yeah,
so
I mean, sharing that for us is, when it's tied to digitization, is about proving that the grant did what it was going to do, right? Did it digitize in the way it said it was going to, and this is helpful. And so in terms of holding things in our collection management system, we would potentially want to do that. It wouldn't just be a one and done throwaway kind of spreadsheet affair. But I'm not the automation expert.
So there is actually a section in the mapping specification on the website that deals with sort of the outcome of a MITS calculation. And in principle, that is quite minimal. It can just be a MITS level per specimen. Behind that, there is a binary map of the different elements achieved for the different mapping conditions. But those do not need to be shared between the MITS level and some metadata, like the mappings that were used to calculate this. So it's useful to exchange MITS data, but it's quite minimal. But the IRIs might be a bit more important when more and more mappings get developed. We've currently made some for some exchange standards, but if people are implementing them in their source system into a certain infrastructure, I can imagine, for instance, if GBIF would implement this at the GBIF level, it would be a bit distinct to the way it works for Darwin Core archives as well. So then you need to create custom mappings, or mapping sets at least, and then you'd need the IRIs to be used. And if you don't have IRIs, it creates quite some ambiguity and confusion potentially over time. So that's why I think the IRI system is needed. The whole RDF structure built behind it, probably not so much, but maybe in the future somebody finds a use case for it. I don't know.
So we have about 3 minutes, and I know we didn't dig in as deep as we wanted to. I would love, and I'm going to say this on behalf of MITS, to actually get some more time on the calendar to dig into this with the folks who really know the techie pieces, because I don't think it's as complicated as it doesn't have to be complicated. It just has to work, right? So Matt, you just put the mailing list stuff in the chat. Thank you. Kat and Elspeth, when you get a chance, maybe you could get the invite information into this agenda for folks so they can jump in to the calls if that's okay. Steve, closing, go for it. You're muted, sorry.
I just was going to make a comment about like using the disciplines as an example. One of the decisions that was made when we started creating controlled vocabularies was to use opaque identifiers for the IRIs. In other words, ones that have numbers in them so that you can't look at the IRI and tell what it is. And the reason we did that is because we were going to tell people use this controlled value. People were getting confused between term names, which are really an abbreviation for the IRI, and strings that we want them to use. And this particularly became important when people who were using these things were not native English speakers, because then there would be an English term and they go like, okay, well, I speak French. I'm just going to translate this into French. And so one of the reasons for structuring the controlled vocabularies the way we did was to make it extremely clear, like, see this string here? Everybody uses string. It doesn't matter what your language is. So, in the case of like the disciplines, if people are going to be exchanging the information and you're going to expect them to give a string in that information exchange, then I would model it as a controlled vocabulary and say, this is the string you should use. Do not translate it in your own language. So I think this is the kind of like knowing how people are going to use it is going to inform decisions you make about, like, is the identifier opaque, or do you just stick the string on the end of the IRI and go with it,
The only thing I will add to that is it's a we, because we're going to have y'all with us to make that decision, because we don't want to make the wrong decision. So it's going to be a we. I will say also that the Wouter Core working group is going to talk about the same kind of thing, but from the perspective of Wouter Core. So that's another place in the next few days where we can dig in a little bit more. And I know we've got a bit more time over there to talk about it, just because we have less on our agenda than the MIDS folks did. So we are at the top of the hour. Erica.
I do think we should close and be respectful of folks' time, but I recognize that we could be here for hours more, probably.
We could. Elspeth, Kat, Mathias, I'm going to let you do the thank yous and the goodbyes, because this is your working group.
Yeah, well, I put the MIDS meeting Zoom link and various infos in the bottom of the document. I put it in the chat. It's every Thursday at 7 a.m. my time. I'm in Oregon, United States, so whatever that is in your time zone. There's a lot of time zones here. But yeah, so I guess this is my turn to say thanks everybody for joining and for all the questions, and also for people's patience with me reading off, not a script, but reading off of my notes. I know it can be kind of annoying when someone's very obviously just reading off a script, but you do what you gotta do. Otherwise, I'll just be bouncing off the walls all over the place. And yeah, thanks to Sharon and Erica, and of course to Mathias and Elspeth and Ben and everyone else that's just been super helpful over these however many years we've been doing this. I'll pass the baton to whoever wants it. I don't know.
Elspeth, real quick.
Super. I'm just going to say, sorry, I'm now on a train, so I'm quite excited. But I'm just going to say thank you, everyone, and huge apologies for not at the beginning. But yeah, thank you, Sharon, as well, for doing such a brilliant job. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for coming along. Really, really good discussion. And we hope to see more people at the meetings. Continue some of the great discussion.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Have good days, and we'll see y'all at another time. Bye.
Thanks, Erica.